Welcome to the Tank Guide Life podcast. Usually when you pack up the car for an aquatic expo, you have this very specific mental image in your head,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. You expect that very standard, slightly sterile convention center vibe.
Exactly. Like you walk through those heavy double glass doors and you are instantly hit with this sensory overload. It's the hum of, 1,000 fluorescent lights.
And that very specific smell.
Yeah, that damp carpet mixed with fish food smell, and then you just see endless, rigid rows of plastic 10 by 10 vendor booths.
Right. It's a highly transactional environment. You're basically there to look at boxes sitting on folding tables.
Yeah, exactly. But today, for this deep dive, we are asking you to take that whole mental image of the traditional convention hall and just completely throw it right out the window.
Because that is absolutely not the environment we walked into.
Not even close.
No. When we pulled up to Plant Fest 2026, which was hosted by Fitz's Fish Ponds, the entire paradigm shifted before we even set foot on the actual property.
Right, because we had to park off-site.
Yeah, we parked off-site, hopped on a shuttle with a bunch of other hobbyists, and we were basically transported to this expansive, open-air, living, aquatic facility.
It was wild. And the mission for our conversation today, it isn't just to recap an event or read off some list of vendors we saw.
No, that would be incredibly boring.
Super boring. Today, we are really focusing on ecosystem thinking. We're going to unpack our observations to understand how a multi-thousand-gallon outdoor koi pond and a tiny filterless glass shrimp bowl sitting on a shelf are actually speaking the exact same biological language.
Because it is all connected.
It really is. I like to think of the aquatic hobby as this massive, sprawling, multi-story estate. Most of us, and you listening are probably guilty of this too, we only ever hang out in one room.
Right. You get comfortable in your niche.
Yeah, you have the planted tank people hanging out in the den, the cichlid keepers are down in the basement, and the pond guys are out in the patio. But today, we are unlocking all the doors. We're walking through the entire house to see how the plumbing actually connects everything together.
That is a brilliant way to frame it, honestly. Because the core philosophy for our discussion today, and really the underlying theme of the entire fish-keeping life co approach, is that scale changes, but biology does not.
Right. Biology is biology.
Exactly. Whether you are managing what is essentially a small personal ocean in your backyard or literally a teacup on your desk, the fundamental rules of nutrient management don't change.
The mechanics of the nitrogen cycle?
Yes, the nitrogen cycle, the pursuit of biological balance, they remain absolute. Nature fundamentally does not care about the volume of the water. It only cares about the equilibrium of the ecosystem.
So to really understand the biology we're going to get into, you first have to kind of understand the physical environment we walked into at this event, because the space itself was designed for immersion, not just, transactions.
It wasn't a commercial trade show in the traditional sense at all. It was hosted entirely on Fitz's Fish Pond's own property.
And here's the thing that really set the tone right away. It was completely free to attend.
Which is huge.
Yeah, you take that shuttle in, you walk up the gravel path to check in, they hand you some raffle tickets, and they basically just say, go explore.
And that lack of an entry fee, combined with that sprawling open layout, provides this crucial context for how people absorb information.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the psychological shift that creates for you as an attendee. When you pay a hefty entrance fee, say 30 or 40 bucks, just to get in the door, and you walk into a hall of booths, your brain is instantly forced into defensive consumer mode.
Oh, for sure. You're trying to get your money's worth.
Exactly. You are constantly calculating, is this worth my time? Is this worth my money? Are these guys just trying to sell me something? It's an adversarial setup.
You have your guard up.
Right.
Yeah.
But at this event, you had attendees freely roaming among working greenhouses. You were walking past these massive outdoor pond setups that were actively running. You had guest speakers rotating through, talking about plant care.
Yeah, the vibe was just totally different.
The psychological wall drops completely. You switch off consumer mode and you switch on observer mode.
Observer mode. I love that phrasing.
Yeah.
It really felt like a community open house rather than a marketplace.
Absolutely.
I mean, there were raffles running all day, sure, but mostly you just saw people standing around the edges of these massive ponds, pointing at fish and having real, deep conversations about water parameters and filtration.
Real education was happening organically.
Yeah. But wait, I actually want to stop you there and push back on this just a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because as much as I love a living display, if I am going to drop, say, $500 or $1,000 on a piece of hardware, let's say a high-end water pump,
Mhm.
I kind of want the traditional expo experience.
You want to hold it.
Yes, I want it on a table. I want to pick it up, look at the impeller, feel the weight of the plastic, and compare it side by side with 3 other brands right there in the same aisle. You can't do that if the pump is buried at the bottom of a 10,000-gallon pond. Doesn't this immersive format actually kind of hurt the consumer who needs to evaluate gear? Like, are we over-romanticizing the whole living display thing?
That is a really valid critique, and I think it gets to the heart of how we evaluate utility versus outcome.
Hmm.
You're absolutely right that if your sole goal is tactile comparison-like, feeling the build quality of the casing of folding table is superior.
Right.
But let's look at what actually matters when you take that pump home. A traditional expo isolates the hardware from its purpose.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Seeing a high-end filtration unit sitting in a cardboard box allows you to read the specs. You can look at the flow rate on the back of the box, but those are just numbers.
They don't mean anything in isolation.
Exactly. Seeing that exact same piece of equipment actively running, integrated into a system, and keeping a $5,000 koi alive in a beautifully balanced pond, that fundamentally changes your understanding of its value.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because you aren't evaluating the pump anymore. You are evaluating the ecosystem stability that the pump facilitates.
Precisely. It shifts your brain's focus from what does this isolated component do to how does this component fit into the whole living puzzle.
And in the aquatic hobby, the puzzle is literally the only thing that actually matters.
Right. A perfect pump in a poorly designed ecosystem will still result in dead fish. By showing the gear in its proper context, they're educating the hobbyist on system design, not just product specs.
Which brings us perfectly to the undeniable centerpieces of the property. And the place where that system design was just most obvious, the massive koi ponds.
They were breathtaking.
You step off that shuttle, walk past check-in, and you are immediately greeted by giant biology. These ponds were absolutely huge, filled with incredibly healthy, vibrant koi.
And some of these fish, as we learned, are valued in the thousands of dollars. It's serious business.
It is incredibly serious. When you are dealing with living assets of that value, it requires a level of environmental stability that leaves absolutely no room for error.
None. A sudden ammonia spike isn't just a frustrating hobby setback. It is a massive financial and emotional loss.
Right. But what was truly fascinating, at least from our nerdy educational perspective, was that the real star of the show wasn't just the fish.
No, it was the visible infrastructure.
Yes.
Yeah.
The exposed plumbing. This was my favorite part of the whole setup because here's where it gets really interesting, especially if you apply it to what we do inside our houses.
The contrast is huge.
It really is. In our home aquariums, we do everything in our absolute power to hide the equipment. We buy black backgrounds so you can't see the wires. We use clear glass lily pipes so the filter returns are invisible.
We shove canister filters deep inside wooden cabinets.
Yeah. And we route the tubing through the back so no one knows it's there. Hiding aquarium equipment is exactly like putting drywall over your house's framing. You want the living room to look pretty, so you hide the studs, the electrical wires, the copper pipes.
Right.
But walking around Fitz's setups was like looking at a beautifully exposed architectural skeleton. They didn't hide anything. You finally understand what holds the house up. Everything was operating in real time, right out in the open.
And that transparency is exactly what makes it an open-air classroom. When you look at the mechanics of large-scale pond filtration, you are seeing the amplified industrial version of what happens in a glass box in your living room.
Because they didn't hide the plumbing, you could trace the exact path of the water.
Let's take the rotating drum filters we observed, for example. These are massive pieces of equipment. In a large pond, you have massive mechanical loads.
We're talking about leaves blowing in from trees, wind-blown debris.
And substantial heavy fish waste from very large animals.
Right, because koi are basically water cows. They eat a lot and they produce a massive amount of waste.
Exactly. Now, in a home aquarium, your mechanical filtration is usually just a sponge or a filter floss pad. Water gets pushed through it, the sponge catches the solid waste, and the water passes through.
Standard stuff.
Right. But here is the critical biological flaw with a sponge filter. The waste is caught, but it is still sitting in the water column. As it sits there, trapped in the sponge, heterotrophic bacteria begin to break down that solid waste, decomposing it, and releasing ammonia directly into the water. You haven't actually removed the waste from the ecosystem. You've just trapped it in a designated corner where it rots.
You physically have to take the sponge out and rinse it in the sink to truly export the waste.
Exactly.
Wow, I've never really thought about it like that. We call it a filter, but it's really just a trash can sitting inside the house. The garbage is still inside until you physically take the bag out.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The garbage is still in the house. Now let's look at how the rotating drum filter solves this on an industrial scale.
Okay, right on me.
The drum filter uses an incredibly fine stainless steel mesh screen, often down to 40 or 70 microns, which is microscopically small. Water from the pond flows into the center of this drum and has to pass through the mesh to get out.
So the mesh physically catches all that solid waste.
Just like the sponge.
Right, just like the sponge.
But here is the genius part. As the mesh catches waste, it starts to clog. When it clogs, water can't pass through as quickly, which means the water level inside the drum starts to rise.
Oh, interesting.
There is a float switch inside. When the water level hits a certain height, it triggers a sensor. That sensor turns on a motor that slowly rotates the drum and simultaneously activates a high-pressure spray bar on the outside of the drum.
Wait, so it cleans itself?
Yes. This spray bar blasts the trapped waste off the mesh and directly into a completely separate waste gutter that is plumbed straight out to the sewer or to a garden bed.
It takes the trash out of the house automatically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It physically removes the organic matter from the water column before it has a chance to break down. It removes the problem before the biology even has to deal with it.
That is brilliant.
You are completely preventing that massive ammonia spike because the solid waste is exported out of the ecosystem entirely. It's mechanical export in its purest form.
That is incredible. And alongside those drum filters, you had massive chillers and heaters to maintain environmental stability.
Yes, and that is equally tied to the biology. We often think of chillers just to keep the fish comfortable, right?
Yeah, like AC for the fish.
Right, but it's actually about the bacteria. The nitrifying bacteria that convert ammonia to nitrite and nitrite to nitrate. They are highly sensitive to rapid temperature swings.
Really? I didn't realize they were that sensitive.
Oh, absolutely. If the water gets too hot, dissolved oxygen levels plummet, and the aerobic bacteria can literally suffocate. If the water drops in temperature too rapidly, their metabolism basically grinds to a halt.
Meaning they just stop processing the fish waste?
Exactly. By using heavy-duty chillers and heaters, you are ensuring the microbial workforce is operating at peak efficiency 24 hours a day.
So let's bring this back down to earth for a second. What does this all mean for the person listening right now who has, say, a standard 10-gallon tank in their bedroom?
Right, the typical hobbyist.
Because a rotating drum filter moving thousands of gallons an hour and flushing itself into a sewer line seems completely detached from a little sponge filter bubbling away in a corner. How is this actually the same language?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the exact same biological math. That massive drum filter and that tiny sponge filter are doing the exact same job. They are providing a physical surface area for beneficial bacteria to colonize, and they are moving oxygenated water past that bacteria so it can intercept and consume ammonia.
The scale of the math changes, but the equation is identical.
Identical. Let's look at the nitrogen cycle. Whether it is a giant koi or a tiny neon tetra, the animal exhales ammonia through its gills and produces waste. That ammonia is highly toxic.
Right.
In the pond, the water is rushed over massive beds of moving biomedia. In your 10-gallon tank, the air pump pulls water through the pores of your sponge. In both cases, nitrous ammonious bacteria grab that ammonia and turn it into nitrite. Then nitrobacter grab the nitrate and turn it into nitrate.
It's literally just moving a decimal point.
Precisely. The biological principles of water movement, surface area, and chemical conversion do not change just because the water volume drops. A bacteria cell doesn't know if it lives in a 5,000-gallon pond or a 5-gallon bucket.
It only knows flow rate, oxygen, and food supply.
Exactly. And really, this is exactly what so many hobbyists are doing when they use the aquarium calculators over on thetankguide.com.
Oh, yeah, the calculators.
When you plug in your tank dimensions, your water volume, and your filter turnover rate, you are basically doing the micro version of the complex engineering math that is happening in those giant outdoor pond systems.
You are trying to calculate exactly how much biological processing power you need to support the life in your specific volume of water.
Exactly right.
That is deeply validating. It makes me feel a lot better about my little sponge filters. So the giant filters, the plumbing, the drum screens, they handle the mechanical waste, they catch the big stuff and process that initial highly toxic ammonia spike. But what manages the deep biological load? Because as you said, the bacteria turns the ammonia into nitrate. Nitrate is less toxic, but it isn't harmless.
No, it's still a pollutant in high concentrations.
If it just builds and builds and builds, the system eventually chokes on itself. You either have to do massive water changes or you need an export mechanism.
And that brings us to the next stop on our walk around the property,
Yeah.
moving above the water line and stepping into the greenhouses.
Oh man, stepping into those large greenhouse structures was genuinely a masterclass in natural nutrient management. We walked out of the bright sun, through these plastic doors, and the heat and humidity just hit you instantly.
It was intense.
And all around us were rows and rows of lotus plants, water lilies, fluting plants, and just a huge, diverse variety of aquatic vegetation in these long, shallow tubs.
It was like walking into a jungle.
It really was. But knowing the ecosystem mindset, these weren't just here to look pretty, were they? They serve a specific mechanical function in the larger pond network.
Absolutely. In ecosystem thinking, plants are not decorations. They are functional living infrastructure. Ponds, especially heavily stocked koi ponds, rely heavily on these immersed and floating plants to pull those excess end product nutrients out of the water column.
Let's talk about why immersed plants. And just to clarify, plants that have their roots in the water but their leaves up in the air, why they are so incredibly powerful.
Right. Let's unpack that, because in the aquarium hobby, we usually focus on submerged plants, plants completely underwater.
Yeah, we obsess over them.
And submerged plants are great, but they face a massive biological bottleneck: carbon dioxide.
Ah, CO2.
Plants need CO2 to photosynthesize. In the water column, dissolved CO2 is relatively scarce. It diffuses into water very slowly. This is why high-tech aquarium hobbyists spend hundreds of dollars on pressurized CO2 tanks, regulators, and diffusers.
They are artificially forcing CO2 into the water so the plants can grow faster.
Exactly. But an immersed plant, like a water lily or a lotus, bypasses that bottleneck entirely. Its leaves are up in the atmosphere. The air we breathe is loaded with CO2, roughly 400 parts per million, which is infinitely more accessible than what is dissolved in a pond.
Oh, that makes total sense. They have an unlimited supply of carbon right from the air.
Right, and because they aren't limited by carbon dioxide, their metabolism can run at maximum speed. They grow incredibly fast. But to build all those huge leaves and stems, they need building blocks: nitrogen and phosphorus.
And where do they get that? They pull it straight out of the water through their root system?
Yes, they are aggressively consuming the nitrates and phosphates produced by the fish waste.
So they're basically outcompeting the algae because algae needs those exact same nutrients to bloom, right? If the lotus plant drinks all the nitrate, the algae literally starves.
Precisely. The plants act as the ultimate biological filtration. They keep the water crystal clear and the fish healthy by acting as a massive living nutrient sink.
That's amazing.
This is why you see so many large ponds utilizing bog filters. Shallow areas packed with plants where the pond water is pumped through before returning to the main display. The plants do the heavy lifting of chemical export that a mechanical filter simply cannot do.
I just love that contrast because in the standard aquarium hobby, we have almost trained ourselves to think of aquatic plants strictly as things that live completely underwater in glass boxes. We obsess over making them stay submerged.
We fight nature on it, really.
We do. But walking through this greenhouse, it showed plants as the bridge between the water and the sky. It proves plants are the heavy lifters of any aquatic ecosystem, whether they are entirely underwater or just dipping their toes in.
And right alongside those heavy lifting aquatic plants in the greenhouse, there was a dedicated bonsai tree section.
Oh yeah, the bonsai trees.
At first glance, a beginner might walk past that and think, why are there tiny trees at a fish pond event?
Oh.
But if you understand the underlying mindset of the people who gravitate towards this hobby, it makes perfect logical sense.
Right, because bonsai fundamentally isn't about water volume or filtration at all. It's about woody plants. It's terrestrial.
It is terrestrial, but the philosophy of bonsai is deeply relevant to aquatic ecosystem keeping.
How so?
Bonsai is the ultimate practice of long-term cultivation. It is about extreme, deliberate patience. The entire art form is based on guiding nature rather than forcing it.
Guiding, not forcing.
Right. When you work on a bonsai tree, you might make a single cut to a branch, then you put your tools down and wait an entire season, 6 months to a year, just to see how the tree responds to that one cut. You are working on a biological timeline, not a human timeline.
Wow. Working on a biological timeline, that is such a powerful takeaway, and it is something we almost always get wrong in the aquarium hobby.
We are so impatient.
We really are. We often try to force our tanks to do what we want right this second. If there's a little bit of algae, we panic, we dump in algaecide chemicals, we blast the lights, we do a 90% water change. We act so
Yeah,
impulsively.
it's a control thing.
Yeah. But the bonsai approach is about partnering with the system. It's about making a small adjustment, maybe slightly dimming the lights, and then just sitting back and watching for 3 weeks.
Exactly. That mindset, observing, reacting slowly, and respecting the timeline of the organism is exactly the mindset required to maintain a balanced koi pond. And it's the exact same mindset required to grow a mature planted aquarium.
Because if you constantly chase perfection and react to every minor fluctuation, you will never achieve stability.
Never.
Okay, so from the massive, sprawling, humid greenhouses, our walk takes us inside the main retail store on the property, and suddenly the scale just completely drops.
It was a drastic shift.
We go from looking at 1,000-gallon outdoor systems to zooming all the way in on the smallest possible scale, the micro-ecosystem.
Inside the store, the contrast was immediate and deliberate. They had a few standard display tanks, specifically two 40-gallon breeders.
And just for the listener, a 40-gallon breeder is a very specific tank dimension. It is shorter and wider than a standard tank, giving it a massive footprint. Why is that important from a biological standpoint?
A wider footprint means more surface area at the top of the water. More surface area means more gas exchange with the air oxygen entering the water and carbon dioxide off-gassing.
So it makes for a highly stable environment.
Exactly, which is why breeders love them.
Yeah.
These specific 40 breeders were holding submerged aquatic species, including some very beautiful high-demand red plants.
Red plants are so tough.
They are notoriously difficult because they require intense lighting, high iron levels, and perfect CO2 balance to maintain their coloration. But while those tanks were impressive, what really stood out were the small, planted glass bowl setups sitting quietly on a shelf.
I practically stopped in my tracks when we saw these. I remember saying to you, we just walked past a drum filter the size of a car outside, and now we're looking at a glass bowl on a shelf doing the exact same biological math with 0 moving parts.
It's a wild realization.
There were no fish in these bowls, there was no mechanical filtration equipment plugged into the wall, no heater, no air pump, just some intricate hardscape, nutrient-rich substrate, some carefully chosen plants, and a small colony of red cherry shrimp.
And it was in perfect, silent balance.
Let's explain the HOW of this. How does a system survive without a filter agitating the surface?
It really is the absolute pinnacle of low-tech ecosystem design, commonly referred to as the Wallstatt method, or a natural planted tank. Let's break down the microscopic biology of that filterless shrimp bowl.
Break it down for us.
Without a mechanical filter to move water around, you are relying entirely on diffusion, thermal microcurrents, and deep biological relationships. The substrate at the bottom of that bowl isn't just dirt. It is a massive, highly structured porous apartment complex for beneficial bacteria.
Okay, but in the drum filter, we talked about how water has to rush past the bacteria for them to get oxygen and food. If there is no pump in this bowl, how does the bacteria get what it needs? How does the substrate not just go completely stagnant and toxic?
That is where the plants become the literal engine of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
The roots of the plants penetrate deep into the substrate. As they grow, they release tiny amounts of oxygen into the soil, creating tiny aerobic pockets.
Oh, that's clever.
Furthermore, the shrimp themselves create microcurrents as they swim and forage. But the real magic happens in the water column during the day. Through the process of photosynthesis, the plants take in light energy and the carbon dioxide produced by the respiration of the shrimp and the bacteria.
Right.
They use that carbon to build their cellular structure, and they release pure oxygen directly into the water as a byproduct. You can actually see it sometimes. It's called pearling, where tiny bubbles of oxygen form on the leaves and float to the surface.
So the plants are acting as the air pump.
Exactly. The plants are oxygenating the water from the inside out. Simultaneously, they are aggressively consuming the nitrates, the end product of the bacterial breakdown of the shrimp waste, using it as fertilizer to grow.
It's a closed loop. The shrimp produce CO2 and waste. The bacteria turn the waste into fertilizer. The plants eat the fertilizer and CO2 and produce oxygen. The shrimp breathe the oxygen.
Almost entirely a closed loop. But the absolute critical factor, the only reason this delicate balance works, is the bioload.
Right. The
biological footprint of a small colony of red cherry shrimp is microscopically small. They produce very little waste. That tiny bioload perfectly matches the processing power of the plants and the bacteria in the substrate.
What if you messed with that balance?
Well, if you were to take that exact same beautiful glass bowl and drop a single goldfish into it, the entire system would collapse in 48 hours.
Because the goldfish is a water cow.
Exactly. The biological load of the goldfish would instantly overwhelm the plants. The bacteria wouldn't be able to reproduce fast enough. Ammonia would violently spike, the oxygen would be entirely depleted, and the system would crash, resulting in a dead fish.
But by keeping the bioload perfectly precisely balanced with the botanical processing power, the ecosystem does all the heavy lifting, not the hardware.
Yes.
That is just brilliant, and it really drives home why we put so much emphasis on resources like the Snail Stocking Advisor and the broader General Stocking Advisor over at thetankguide.com.
They are such important tools.
The whole point of those tools isn't just to tell you if a fish physically fits inside a glass box. It's to help you, the hobbyist, understand how to perfectly balance that invisible bioload.
Exactly. It's about achieving that silent, effortless balance we saw in the glass bowl, regardless of whether you have a massive canister filter running or no filter at all. You have to respect the math of the bioload.
So as we were staring at these filterless bowls, just kind of geeking out over the diffusion of oxygen, a realization hit. We overheard a conversation right next to us that proved we weren't the only ones making these connections between the giant ponds outside and the tiny bowls inside.
It was a very telling moment.
Let's talk about the universal language of beginners and the incredible crossover we saw.
Yeah, there was a specific interaction we witnessed that perfectly encapsulated the state of the modern hobby. A beginner, clearly inspired by the beautiful submerged plant displays in the shrimp bowls, walked up to a staff member.
And remember, we are at Fitz's Fish Ponds, an event primarily dedicated to massive outdoor koi systems.
Right. But this beginner asked the staff if they sold aquasoil for planted aquariums.
And for context, aquasoil is a very specific product. It's essentially baked clay infused with rich nutrients, designed specifically for growing delicate underwater plants in aquariums.
It lowers the pH and provides a massive nutrient bank.
You would never use aquasoil in a 10,000-gallon koi pond. It would cost an absolute fortune and just turn into mud.
Right, and the staff politely explained that they mostly carry pond-related substrate like heavy gravel and river rock. But that interaction is a perfect microcosm of the fluidity of the aquatic hobby today. Decades ago, this hobby was incredibly siloed. You had the pond keepers over here digging holes in their yards and dealing with PVC pipe, and you had the aquarium keepers over there dealing with glass boxes and glass heaters.
And those two groups rarely mixed.
Rarely. They read different magazines, they went to different shops. But today, because of the internet, you have a visible, constant mix of crowds.
It really is dissolving the boundaries. You have older, experienced koi pond keepers who have been doing this for 40 years, mingling in the exact same physical space as a younger, social media-driven generation of planted tank hobbyists.
The ones who got into the hobby by watching aesthetic Instagram reels or TikToks of aquascapes.
Yeah, exactly. And they are sharing the exact same ideas. We saw younger attendees walking around the store, recognizing high-end planted tank gear. They were pointing out Chihiro's lighting, which is a brand known for incredibly sleek, app-controlled, high-output LED lights used by competitive aquascapers.
Sitting right on the shelf alongside heavy-duty industrial pond brands like Oa's. The distinction between indoor water and outdoor water is completely fading.
But let me ask you this, because this is something I struggle with when writing guides. Do we overcomplicate things for beginners by inventing all this different jargon for ponds versus tanks?
Oh, absolutely we do.
We use entirely different vocabularies to describe the exact same biological processes, just depending on whether the water is inside or outside. We call it a bog filter outside, but a refugium inside. We call it pond matrix outside, but bioballs inside.
It's so confusing for a newcomer.
When you strip away the marketing and the branding, the foundational beginner questions are identical regardless of the water volume, aren't they?
They absolutely are. When you distill it down, what are those foundational questions every single beginner asks? They are always, what substrate should I use at the bottom? What kind of filtration is mathematically necessary for this water volume?
How do I actually get things to grow without growing algae?
Yes, and most importantly, the Holy Grail. How do I keep this system stable long-term?
Exactly. Whether you are staring at a 5-gallon nano tank on your desk or a 5,000-gallon pond in your backyard, you are asking those exact same 4 questions.
And that shared curiosity is the lifeblood of the entire hobby. It's the realization that regardless of our specific aesthetic preferences, we are all actually studying the exact same subject. applied aquatic biology.
Right.
If you explore the blogs and the media page on thetankguide.com, you see exactly this phenomenon in action. The content there isn't just about buy this product. It is heavily dedicated to answering those universal questions about stability, nutrient cycling, and maintenance.
Because once you understand the core principles, how bacteria process waste, how plants utilize carbon, you can apply them to any volume of water, anywhere.
You unlock the whole house, not just one room. You can walk from the basement to the patio and understand how everything works.
Okay, so speaking of applying these principles, being surrounded by all this inspiration at Plant Fest, the giant thundering ponds, the lush, humid greenhouses, the perfect, silent little shrimp bowls, usually, that leads to a massive buying frenzy.
Totally. You get inspired, your wallet gets hot, and you want to take it all home and immediately start building.
But understanding ecosystems means knowing when to stop. Which brings us to the philosophy of the art of doing nothing and a very specific project back at headquarters.
Yes, the urge to buy those beautiful red submerged plants for the display tanks at Fish Keeping Life Co. was incredibly strong. The colors were vibrant, the quality was excellent.
But there was a deliberate, conscious decision made that day to buy absolutely nothing for the ongoing 29-gallon planted tank project.
They decided to walk away empty-handed and leave the tank completely alone.
I completely relate to this struggle. The current goal for that 29-gallon project is to create a self-sustaining environment, reducing maintenance, minimizing water changes, and just observing how a tank behaves in long-term maturity.
But it is so incredibly hard to just sit on your hands.
Why is the hardest skill in the aquatic hobby just having patience? Why do we always want to mess with it?
Because it goes against our active human nature. We are problem solvers. We want to do things to feel like we are making progress. If we aren't trimming, moving, cleaning, or adding, we feel like we are neglecting the system.
But let's break down the hidden biology of a maturing tank. Let's look at what is happening when you think nothing is happening.
Okay, when you set up an ecosystem, microbial colonies need time to settle and stratify in the substrate. The substrate isn't uniform.
Right.
The top layer is aerobic, processing ammonia. The deeper layers become anaerobic, where different bacteria actually break down nitrates into nitrogen gas. That stratification takes months to form.
It's building an unseen infrastructure.
Exactly. And the plants are doing the same thing. Plant roots need time to establish deep, complex, interconnected networks to pull nutrients efficiently. They actually change the chemical composition of the soil around their roots to make iron more available.
It is building an invisible web of dependencies.
And here's the danger. Every single time you plunge your hands into the water to add a new variable, whether that is planting a new stem, adding a new group of fish, or even completely changing your liquid fertilization routine, you are essentially resetting that biological clock.
Let's use the uprooting example. When you decide you don't like a plant and you pull it out, what actually happens?
When you violently rip a plant out of the substrate, you are tearing up that stratified microbial layer. You are releasing trapped organic matter and raw ammonia that was safely buried deep in the soil straight into the water column.
You are breaking the root connections.
Yes. The system has to abruptly pause its maturation, recalibrate to the new input and the sudden ammonia spike, redistribute its resources, and try to find an entirely new equilibrium. You send shockwaves through the microbiology.
Oh, that is such a great point. It's violent on a microscopic level.
Yeah.
I always use this analogy. We treat our tanks like apps on our phone that need constant updates.
Oh, I like that.
We look at it and think, oh, version 2.1 of my aquascape needs more red plants in the background, so we update it. But an ecosystem is much more like a slow-cooked meal, like a stew. If you keep opening the lid every 5 minutes to add more spices, to stir it around vigorously, to check the temperature, it's never going to finish cooking. You lose all the heat. You never let the flavors actually blend.
That is a perfect analogy. The art of doing nothing is about allowing the system the uninterrupted time it requires to achieve true deep stability.
The plants know how to grow. The microbes know how to process waste. They don't need our constant management. They just need us to stop interrupting them.
And that is exactly why it is so important to track this hands-off approach. It's why keeping a daily tank journal is such a powerful tool.
Documenting your restraint is just as important as documenting your additions.
You write down day 45. Really wanted to buy red plants today. Didn't. Left it alone. Tank water actually looks clearer today. By writing it down, you satisfy the urge to do something, but you protect the ecosystem.
Sometimes real progress in this hobby is defined exclusively by what you don't do.
It requires a fundamental shift in perspective.
Mhm.
You have to transition from being the creator of the ecosystem to being an observer of it. You set the initial parameters, and then you step back and let nature take the wheel.
All right, so we didn't buy aquatic plants for the 29-gallon tank. We practiced the art of doing nothing for that specific
Oh,
system.
we did.
But let's be real, you don't go to an amazing immersive event like PlantFest 2026, take a shuttle onto a beautiful farm, and leave completely empty-handed. We had to get something to commemorate the trip.
Of course.
But the ecosystem mindset we'd been cultivating all day just shifted slightly to the left. Let's take a carnivorous detour for our final segment.
Yes. The final purchase of the day was entirely unexpected, but it provided one of the best biological lessons of the entire trip.
What do we get?
We ended up in a small section of the greenhouse and purchased carnivorous plants. Specifically, a Sarracenia, which is a tall tubular titcher plant, and a Drosera, which is commonly known as a sundew, those sticky dew-covered tentacles.
Right. They are fascinating, bizarre little alien plants. And here is where the story gets really interesting from a water chemistry perspective.
Yeah, it does.
When we were checking out, we asked the staff at the event a question that seemed logical to any aquarium keeper. We asked, hey, can we feed these carnivorous plants our old aquarium water?
Which seems like a great idea.
Exactly. You know, the water we siphon out during our weekly water change, it is full of fish waste, nitrates, and broken down organics. It's liquid fertilizer. We use it on our houseplants all the time.
And the staff immediately shook their heads and strongly advised against it.
They said, no, absolutely not. You will kill them. You need to use pure distilled water.
And this is a phenomenal masterclass lesson in the biology of specialized extreme ecosystems.
Oh.
Let's explain why carnivorous plants need distilled water and why aquarium water is a death sentence for them.
Break it down.
These plants, the pitchers, the sundews, the Venus flytraps, they evolved over millions of years in incredibly specific environments. Bogs and wetlands.
What makes a bog different from a swamp or a pond?
A bog is a wetland that accumulates peat, usually from sphagnum moss. Bogs receive all of their water strictly from precipitation, rain, and fog. They do not have rivers flowing into them carrying minerals from rocks.
So they're super isolated.
Because of this, the soil is incredibly acidic, and it is almost entirely devoid of accessible nutrients. The cold, acidic conditions prevent dead plant matter from fully decomposing, which means there is virtually no nitrogen or phosphorus available in the ground.
So they are sitting in wet soil, but they are starving for building blocks. They had to find a different food source.
Precisely. They evolved their traps, the pitchers, the sticky doo-doo catch and digest insects to get the vital nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer they need to survive.
Wow.
Because of this unique evolutionary path, their root systems are incredibly delicate. They function primarily just to anchor the plant and absorb pure rainwater. They completely lost the biological ability to process heavily mineralized, nutrient-rich soil or water.
So what happens if you pour aquarium water on them?
If you expose their delicate roots to the rich nitrates, phosphates, calcium, and dissolved minerals found in seasoned aquarium water, it triggers a catastrophic reaction. The high concentration of minerals outside the root creates osmotic shock. It literally pulls water out of the plant cells.
Oh, yikes.
The minerals will burn their root structures, poison the plant, and kill it very quickly. They need distilled water, which is water that has been boiled into vapor and condensed back into liquid, leaving all impurities and minerals behind. It is pure H2O.
This gave me a massive aha moment on the ride home. It's the ultimate lesson in water chemistry.
It really is.
Think about the irony here. In our fish tanks, we spend all of our time, energy, and money trying to build up a rich biological soup. We want those nitrates for our aquatic plants. We intentionally add dissolved minerals like calcium and magnesium so our snails can build strong shells and our cherry shrimp can molt successfully.
We consider that seasoned, cycled aquarium water to be absolute liquid gold.
But for a Sarracenia pitcher plant, that exact same liquid gold is literal toxic waste.
And this brings us right back to the core lesson of the entire deep dive, and really the philosophy of Fish Keeping Life Co. A healthy environment is entirely relative to the organism you are keeping.
Healthy is relative.
Yes, good water does not exist in a vacuum. Understanding water parameters isn't about hitting a perfect, universal set of numbers that applies to everything. It's about matching the water chemistry to the specific evolutionary needs of the ecosystem you are cultivating.
Good water for a massive, heavy-feeding koi is terrible water for a delicate bog sundew.
Good water for a hard-water African cichlid is terrible water for a soft-water Amazonian discus.
That is profound. It just goes to show how incredibly nuanced the natural world is and how much we have to learn when we step outside our usual boundaries and look at how different ecosystems solve the exact same problems of survival.
It absolutely reinforces the interconnectedness of all these disciplines. Whether you are a mechanical engineer designing the filtration of a massive public pond, a hobbyist carefully balancing the bioload of a filterless shrimp bowl on your desk, or a botanist providing zero-nutrient distilled water to a carnivorous bog plant,
You are doing the exact same thing.
you are engaging in ecosystem management.
So, to bring it all together and wrap up this incredible trip, Plant Fest 2026 at Fitz's Fish Ponds wasn't just a fun event where we looked at expensive fish. It was a mirror reflecting the entire aquatic hobby back at us.
It truly was.
We saw that from the industrial scale drum filters managing massive biological loads, all the way down to the silent, filterless biology of a planted cherry shrimp bowl relying on diffusion and photosynthesis.
The scale of the container changes drastically, but the pursuit of biological balance connects every single one of us.
The math of the nitrogen cycle is exactly the same, just with a different decimal point.
And the patience required to let a bonsai tree grow and guide its branches over years is the exact same patience required to let a 29-gallon planted tank mature and find its own equilibrium.
When we stop looking at our setups as collections of expensive equipment and start looking at them as complex living ecosystems, the whole hobby opens up in a way that is infinitely more rewarding.
It's a beautiful shift in perspective.
Which leaves you, our listener, with a final provocative thought. I want to issue a challenge to you based on everything we discussed today.
Oh, I like a challenge.
I want you to go look at your own aquatic setup right now, whether that is a massive outdoor pond, a standard 40-gallon community tank, or a tiny desktop nano bowl. Look at it. What would happen if, for the next 2 weeks, you stopped tweaking?
Just walked away.
You stopped moving the plants around, you stopped adjusting the flow rate on the filter, you didn't buy or add any new livestock. What if you just put your hands in your pockets and let it be?
Ask yourself, are you managing the ecosystem or are you just getting in its way?
That is a brilliant question worth exploring. Observe, don't interfere. Let the stew cook.
Let it cook.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Plant Fest and the wider, weird, wonderful world of aquatic ecosystems. Stay curious, keep learning, and above all, trust the biology. We'll see you next time on the Tank Guide Life podcast.